It's just been a great number of talks, ambitious projects, all sorts of different, super interesting things. So thanks to all the people sharing their research. And again, thanks to Daryl for bringing such a diverse group of people together. Totally awesome. He's great at this stuff. So I'm going to have a little bit of an eclectic talk. It's not about any one thing. It's kind of a few different things. Some unexpected, maybe that's the wrong word, interesting dimensions of moral person perception. Some more unexpected and some less. Let me see how I got to click on this. All right, so everybody here knows this, but humans are curious and imaginative. We're natural storytellers, so we can get a lot of information out of things that don't even exist sometimes, and that's part of the unexpected part, right? That we sometimes make up things that don't even exist in terms of moral and other sort of qualities of people's minds. So what I'm going to talk about today is a few things. One about how desire or wanting something to happen could shape beliefs about mental contents and character. How not wanting something good to happen can make you seem just as bad as wanting something bad to happen, which I think is sort of interesting. How attempting to guide other people's behavior can lead to unexpected inferences and make you a hypocrite, and some work that I'm doing with one of my students. And if I have time, we'll see, I probably should, but we'll see if I have time. I'll also talk a little bit about some work I did on attractiveness and moral judgments. So intentional harms are the worst kind of harms. We don't like it when people do things and they mean to hurt other people, right? And that's you see that throughout a number of different types of theories of blame and morality. So we just don't like it when people want to hurt people, right? And that's pretty clear. But intentionality decisions, so when people think about whether someone meant to do something or did it purposefully, that rests on an assumption about a lot of other mental states, either being present or trying to infer that they're present. And so one of those things that's important is that, well, when you do something intentionally, you wanted that thing to happen, right? You meant to do what you did because you wanted the thing to happen that happened. And so that's the one that I'm going to talk about today, even though there's other things I did in this work. Foreknowledge, you have to have some expectation that doing the thing that you're going to do is going to lead to some outcome that's consistent with the thing that you want to happen. And then awareness, and this comes from Malionob's 1997 paper, like way back, just talking about sort of folk descriptions of intentionality, is that you're aware that you're doing what you're doing while you're doing it, right? So I'm doing this thing, and I know that it's going to make this thing happen, and I want this thing to happen that I'm doing, right? And the mental states, I would argue that they should be relatively independent. Maybe they're not. Maybe people don't see them as independent, but they should be relatively independent. So just because I want something to occur doesn't mean that if I do something that causes it to occur that I actually knew that that was going to happen, right? And just because I'm aware that I'm doing a particular thing doesn't mean that I know it's going to lead to some particular outcome or that I want that outcome to occur. So they should be relatively independent. So this is some work that I did about 10 years ago. I had a couple of studies. I'm going to just talk about one of the two studies in there because I thought it was pretty interesting. So it's a little bit of a complicated setup to the story, so just bear with me for a second. Okay? There was a long narrative, like 5-6 paragraphs, something like that, hundreds of words in response to some reviewer comments about not just giving people the information straight away. So I sort of hid it in a lot of other information. So we've got Adam and Ben. They are housemates. They live with each other. They met after college. Ben is dating Heidi, but he used to date Samantha, okay? Ben and Samantha are still pretty good friends, and Heidi doesn't like that Ben is hanging out with Samantha. And if I get the names wrong, it's a little bit complicated. So Heidi is unhappy that Ben and Samantha are still good friends, okay? One evening, when Ben was supposed to meet Heidi for something, he got an emergency call from Samantha, and he rushed over to help her because they're still very, very good friends. And he was actually helping her with some boyfriend issues that she was having. Heidi calls the house because he never shows up, and Adam picks up the phone, and he's like, oh yeah, Ben's not here. He's helping his friend Samantha with something. Okay. Heidi breaks up with Ben. Okay, this is the sort of setup of the story. Okay? So the manipulation that I'm going to talk about is the desire one. I also manipulated foreknowledge, not in the way that you think I would. But Adam is either attracted to Heidi or he's not attracted to Heidi at all. And when he is attracted, I make it very clear, or he makes it very clear, he's not going to do anything about it. He would be totally unwilling. And I see a cringe look. It's kind of funny. I've talked about it. Everyone immediately, they're like, even to be attracted to her is but people are attracted to people. I'm skeptical. He wouldn't do anything. I swear. He's a really, really nice guy. He's clearly very unwilling to act on the attraction. So I did manipulate Adam's foreknowledge in this study, but I'm not going to talk about that today. Importantly, in all of these outcomes, it would have been impossible. It actually would have been impossible, given the details of the story, for Adam to have anticipated the negative outcome. He didn't actually know that Samantha was Ben's ex-girlfriend. He had no idea. He just thought that Samantha was a friend, even if he knew something about how Heidi felt about Ben and his ex-girlfriend. So he didn't know that that was the ex-girlfriend. So anyway, then I measured a few things like immorality, and I measured this importantly, again, I measured it after the desire manipulation happened, but before any action, Heidi calling, any of these things, other things happened or the outcome was described. Okay, so I sort of just described how he felt, and then I asked people, how immoral is he? Before asking about the rest of the dependent measures. And then after the outcome, I asked things about like how much blame does Adam deserve for Heidi breaking up with Ben? How aware was Adam of what he was doing? And whether Adam knew that Heidi didn't want Ben to see his ex-girlfriend, which may have been true in the foreknowledge condition, but in the other condition, it wouldn't be because he didn't even know that was the ex-girlfriend. Okay, and so here is what I found in this one. And so essentially what we find is that when desire was present, they thought he was more aware of what was going to happen or what he, I guess, awareness of what he was doing as he did it. They blamed him more for it. They thought he knew what was going to happen as a function of what he did. And they also thought he was much more immoral. So this one that I put last, though, remember, this was measured before any of these other ones were assessed, before I actually even described the outcome or anything like that. And so I thought this was really interesting because especially things like blame and foreknowledge, because he really couldn't be blamed for it. There's no way he could have possibly known that this was going to lead. There's so many factors that could have led the girlfriend to break up with Ben. And his saying that he was over there is not one of them, right? I guess, except in the sense that he is the person who told her that he was there. And so then I conducted some path analyses. There's a lot of paths that are not here that are not significant, and I tested a lot of other alternative models beyond this. So I'm just kind of showing you the one that I sort of ultimately went with that was the most parsimonious, in that this manipulated desire did predict judgments of immorality, right? Of how immoral the character was, again, measured before any of the other DVs. And then that led to this idea that he had more awareness. The awareness led to this belief that he actually could foresee what was going to happen, and also led to blame. And the blame itself made it seem like he knew more, right, than he did. And so I guess my little conclusion for this is that even when it's completely unwarranted, the immorality of forbidden desire, right, wanting something you're probably not supposed to want or admit to wanting, can lead to blame in a sense that you anticipated an outcome. So now I'm switching directions, and I said I'm going to be a little bit all over the place with this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the side effect. I'm sure many, if not most of you, know what the side effect is. I know several people have written about things on this. So the typical manipulation, for those who might not be as familiar, is that a chairman doesn't care about whether some new program they're told about will help or harm the environment. They just want profits, right? And so they say, go ahead and start it. The program is started, and then the environment is harmed, as would be expected, or helped. So intentionality effects and foreknowledge effects, I've examined these in some of my other work that I'm not going to talk about. But the thing I do want to talk about is that people indicate that the chairman wanted to harm more than he wanted to help, right? And it's the same exact scenario across all of these. Only one word has changed, and so you sort of say, well, why do they think he wants to harm more than he wants to help? Well, I'll hopefully make a little bit of sense of this, right? Yet at the same time, he's not seen as a substantially more bad person, even though he wanted to harm more than he wanted to help. So why might this be? Well, I think that one of the issues is that there's a misalignment between the valence of these different types of responses, right? In one case, I'm saying, how much do you want to harm? Well, that's bad. We don't like people who want to harm. That's antisocial. But it's good to want to help, right? And so that's a pro-social response, right? A pro-social thing that you're doing. And so if you want to help an entity like the environment, that's going to be a positive evaluation. And if you want to harm an entity, that's going to have an inference that you're an antisocial agent. So comparing how much you want to harm to how much you want to help is sort of misaligned. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges. I'm comparing bad things with good things. So how do you deal with it? Well, you just realign the valence of one of the scales. It's not that overly complicated, I thought. And so in this case, what I would do is say, well, let's reverse the wanting to help to how much do you not want to help, right? How much are you against helping, okay? And I could then compare that to how much do you actually want to harm and see what happens. See if that actually holds up, that people still think you want to harm more than you want to not help, right? So I'll call that anti-helping. And now they're both sort of antisocial motives, right? And so I did a bunch of studies. I'm not going to talk about all of them because that would take a lot of time, but there's probably like 9 or 10 of these. I'm going to just talk about one abbreviated because a room full of academics, it's sort of fun to talk about the academic one that I did that I got from my colleague Brandon Reich, who did some of this work with me. So Professor Smith, pick a gender, is a researcher at a university who asked a colleague for feedback on a paper that they had written. And this is a little abbreviated. The colleague loves the paper. This is a great paper of yours, but notes that if you publish this could really help your colleague. You know, this would really help them out because they're doing something similar. It can actually really harm them. This kind of challenges some of their work in a way that could harm them. Smith is like, I don't care. I just want to publish this paper and advance my own career, right? So very similar to the traditional chairman side effect. I also manipulated in this study whether the outcome that happened, did it help their career or hurt their career? It didn't matter. So I'm not going to talk about it, right? I manipulated it in some studies just to make sure that it wasn't the outcome driving the effects that I was talking about, but really the attitudes, which is the thing I was interested in, okay? And so then I measured the desire to harm and help, and I reversed this in the help condition to be like anti-help. How much against helping are you? And then I just measured, among other things, but I'm really just going to talk about the badness. How bad is this person? Okay, things like how ruthless are they? How much of a terrible person are they? How much would they like harm other people to get what they want, sort of thing? Okay, on 9-point scales. And before the reversal, desire to harm was significantly higher than desire to help, as you might expect, consistent with past work. So here are what that looked like, put together very quickly, like a day ago or something like that. So the anti-desire is in blue in the help condition, and how bad a person is also the help condition in blue, and green is in the harm condition. And what you can see, it's a pretty huge effect, right? The inference that they really did not want to help, if you even look at where it is on the scale, it's like almost tapped out. They're like, they really didn't want to help at all. Whereas in the harm condition, it's sort of near the midpoint of the scale. They're like, they didn't really want to harm. They just didn't care, right? And in both cases, they just said they didn't care. But you can see that in the help condition, not caring seems like you're actually not saying that you don't care. You're saying, I really do not want to. I don't want to help. And you can see that the inference, well, we do get an inference that in the harm condition, there may be a worse person, a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more willing to sacrifice people for their own gain. And then I just conducted a series of mediations in each of these studies because I wanted to see, well, are they really that much worse, or are they both seen as bad for different reasons in terms of how bad a person they are? And that's really what I found, is that you get this total effect that's a 1.16, scale difference in terms of the help and harm condition in terms of how bad they are. But you get this huge effect in terms of the help condition being higher than the harm condition for the anti-desire versus desire. And that also predicts how bad a person they are. And so if you look at this indirect effect down here at the bottom, it is actually increased. I've now covariated something out, and it's larger than it was when it started, indicating suppression. Right? So in other words, and then if you look at the indirect effect down here, after I've accounted for it, it's maybe half the size, but about the size of the original effect, right? So they really think that the good person is actually quite bad, almost as bad as they think the bad person who wanted to harm was. And so I think that that's pretty interesting. So my little take home from this is that, well, callousness about harming is definitely not great, but when you dismiss the notion of helping someone and just don't seem to care about it, it makes you seem almost equally as bad. And that's, I'm going to, I guess, say it's probably even more so true when it's really easy to help. Like when someone says something to you like, hey, this is a great paper, and if you publish this is going to help your colleague, and you're like, I don't care. You sound kind of like an asshole. I mean, like really, you sound like a real jerk because why not just be like, hey, that's great. Everybody wins, right? Okay. So hypocrisy, I'm going to switch gears again and then maybe one last time, depending on how much time I have. So we know what it is. We don't like hypocrites. Okay. And this is most frequently defined as saying one thing and then doing another. And we know that we like to punish the same transgressions more when there's hypocrisy involved, right? So if you do the same bad thing, but it also kind of makes you a hypocrite when you do it, people are like, that's even more punishable, right? Okay. So what about when you say one thing, but you don't do another, okay? And this is some work that I'm doing with Sarah Mowry in the lab. And so the aphorism is not very specific. So a long time ago, I got really interested in this question of like, okay, I've been doing some research with this guy, Brian Clark, on hypocrisy. And I was like, but when you say one thing and then do another, it matters what thing you're saying and what thing you're doing. It's not like just say anything and then do something else. Like I say, I don't like bananas, and then I go for a walk in the park, right? Like I said one thing, did another. But it really has to do with the connection between the attitudes and behaviors, the things that you're expressing or asking other people to behave like, and then what you do yourself. So this made me wonder, can our imaginations create hypocrisy where you would think it's not even, according to the definition, shouldn't be there? So maybe the person who created this monstrosity of a Prius just likes the way it looks. And they're not just some sort of weird hypocrite for like, wow, why are you putting a Prius into a monster truck? Okay. So this led to this sort of conceptualizing of different kinds of hypocrisy, right? So direct hypocrisy, what I'm going to call direct hypocrisy, it's when someone expresses a focused opinion and then directly contradicts it. Like someone says, you really should drive fuel efficient cars, and then they themselves like step into their oversized SUV. And you're like, well, that's pretty hypocritical of you, right? Things that most people would recognize as hypocrisy. There's also this idea of generalized hypocrisy. So in this case, you might not tell people exactly what to do, but you express a broad value associated with something. So you say, for example, people should try to practice sustainability, and then you buy an oversized SUV, which is not particularly sustainable, but you never said you can't have that. You just said you should be sustainable. And then this idea of indirect hypocrisy, where you express the same focused opinion as before, and now you behave in a way that contradicts the broader value that the opinion might suggest. Like that opinion suggests you might feel this way. So for example, you say people should move towards veganism and avoid eating meat, and then you buy an oversized SUV. So it's like, there's something that whiffs a little there, and you're not sure what it is. It's like, well, you didn't actually contradict what you said by buying the SUV, but it sort of smells a little bit like hypocrisy nevertheless. Okay, so the idea here is that indirect hypocrisy involves, it sort of like calls up these associative networks. So for example, I say people should be vegan. And you think, well, this person is probably pro-sustainability, right? It can imply this. It could also imply other things, like maybe it's a health thing, something like that. But it could imply that you're for sustainability. And if you're for sustainability, it suggests you're not going to go around buying oversized SUVs, right? And so it's not as direct as saying don't drive big SUVs and driving one, or saying you should drive fuel efficient cars, but it's like in the ballpark because of its association with this concept in the middle through an associative network. So the method, and we've done a bunch of studies. We've done 7 or 8 studies so far, but the one I'm going to talk about a couple really briefly. And so the method generally is that people would read about a target who expresses certain kinds of attitudes, either general or specific attitudes, and then rate how hypocritical it would be for them to perform different kinds of behaviors. In the general attitudes express a broad value, like people should behave sustainably, and general behaviors are things that are either consistent with or inconsistent with that broad value. So if it's sustainability, it could be any number of things like recycling, not littering, blah, 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 not driving a fuel efficient car. Specific attitudes suggest that people should behave in specific ways, right? And as opposed to a general attitude. And then specific behaviors are the ones that are inconsistent with these prescriptions for others' behavior. So it's important to remember that the specific behaviors go with the specific attitudes, but they're also indicators of general attitudes, okay? So the specific behaviors are tied to the specific attitudes, but they're also like an indicator of the general attitude. And then we had unrelated attitudes, unrelated behaviors as kind of a double kind of control. So in other words, we had an unrelated attitude condition to show that hypocrisy should be increased in these other conditions relative to when the attitude has nothing to do with anything. But then we also did a sort of within condition control of unrelated behaviors, because those shouldn't be, you should have hypocrisy higher than the unrelated behaviors, even in the hypocrisy conditions, right? So two ways of sort of controlling both across people and within people. So here's some of the data from one study, from experiment 3. It had 896 people. These were all scale responses. And what you can see here on the chart is that in the general attitude condition, which is down here, they thought that these, let's see, so we have general attitude condition, then we have general behaviors, specific behaviors, and unrelated behaviors. So the general and specific behaviors looked equally hypocritical, as they should. And the unrelated ones didn't look all that hypocritical. That all makes perfect sense. And then in the unrelated condition, right, nothing looked hypocritical, and that makes perfect sense. Everything was unrelated, so you're not really connecting anything to hypocrisy. What's interesting here is in the specific attitude condition. And what you see is the specific behavior, that's off the charts, right? That's the typical form of hypocrisy. Say one thing, do another. You said blah, blah, and then you did that thing. But what's interesting is you get sort of in the middle of the scale. People are seeing hypocrisy even when you have this very specific thing you're telling people to do or not do, and then they don't violate that in any way. They do something different, but people are making inferences about this through this sort of general domain that the specific attitude belongs to. The second one is just confirming this. This is actually a reaction time study, but I'm not showing you the reaction time data. I'm just showing you the aggregate responses for yeses and nos. So in this case, rather than giving people a scale, we just asked people straight up, are they hypocritical or are they not? So you had to make a categorical decision, right? And in this case, you see the same pattern, right? The specific behavior and the general behavior in the general attitude condition, almost everyone says hypocritical. Almost no one says that the unrelated behavior is hypocritical. Unrelated condition, everybody says, no, you're not a hypocrite for doing this. And in this condition, it's intermediate in the specific attitude condition. So the specific behavior is, most people say that it's hypocritical, but you get almost 50%, 45% of people saying that other behaviors that are in the general domain are hypocritical. So categorically, about half of people are willing to say this is hypocritical. This person is a hypocrite for doing this. All right, how am I doing for time, Daryl? Wrap it up in a minute or two. Okay, so what you say and do has implications beyond what you say and do, and that's the point of this. So I was gonna, I'll just do a couple slides on here. This is just some research I did because it's sort of fun. And why not leave it off on a fun note, right? So you're good looking, super good looking. Yeah, so what? Okay. Halo effects and beautiful or good effects suggest that looking good means people think you are good. And, but then I want to just ask this question. Which of these two people do you think is vainer? And if you think that it's the one on the left, you'd be in good company because almost everyone does. And what we really found is that people link attractiveness to immorality through this concept of vanity. And so rather than showing you a lot of data, we have a 2023 JPSP paper talking about this. So I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to skip. And instead just conclude and say thank you. So thank you. Thanks for coming. I got a couple minutes for a couple of questions if anyone has one. Yeah, damn. Oh, yeah. I have to pass the microphone.
I have a question on the second part of the talk. And since it's in progress, hopefully it will be generative. The scenario with publishing, I'm channeling Jesse Sun's talk from yesterday on values conflict. And it's an interesting context because by helping and harming, it's confounded with whether you're going to potentially be dishonest by burying your findings or not. I mean, whether people are reading into it, but certainly when we think of science and the importance of publishing what we know. And so that contest strikes me as a confound there. And I'm curious how you think, or maybe there's other scenarios or a future study where you could rule that out, because I think part of the evaluations, attributions of helpfulness are not just about help and harm, but about whether you are being honest or not honest, right? Which could be a values conflict there that's clouding the findings. So if you were to run another study, would you be able to separate those a little bit?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I hadn't really thought about that. That's super interesting. I guess I would say I've run about 9 to 14 of them across a bunch of. I only have one that uses the scenario of like a scientist publishing a paper. The rest of them are I've done them in sort of just very general ways, where I just sort of generally say like a person does this and that, like in this abstract form, works there. I've used the traditional chairman scenario and found it in old data that I have. Have found it there. I've done it in a lot of different ways, and I think most of those ways don't have that same confound. And the fact that the results are remarkably consistent across all the studies gives me a little bit less concern that like in this particular study, that's what's driving it. Actually, and sometimes what I found, what's really interesting is the amount of suppression I get is like exactly equal, like exactly to the number, to the difference that I get in those two coefficients when I include it. So the difference between the total effect and the direct effect is exactly the effect that I get indirectly through it. So it's kind of showing me that I guess what I think, the conclusion I would draw, kind of like Jesse did yesterday, is that people are of two minds about this a little bit, and that when you see this good one, that definitely drives you to think that they're just as bad as when you see this person doing the bad thing. It's worse for a different reason, right? And I think that it's bad in the case of harming someone because you're just being callous. You're like, oh, I don't really care. I just want what I want. And in the case of the good outcome, it's not even just that you want what you want. It's that you are totally unwilling in any way to say like that it's a good thing that someone else has helped. You're just so selfish. And so I've asked a lot of other questions than just these ones that I'm talking about that are left off just for sort of like the flow of the talk. But people make a lot of inferences about like what kind of a person you are and the reasons that you'll do it and the different types of terrible things you would do, because I think they just make general inferences that you're pretty terrible if you're not willing to help people when it's like easy to do so. And I've actually done this experimentally as well. So I guess in other research, I've manipulated the desire feature, and what I find is those effects go away for like the desire inferences and bad people inferences and blame and praise asymmetries and all that stuff. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, last question? I feel like I didn't get. I saw you first.
It's good to be tall. So this is really interesting. I want to ask about the indirect hypocrisy stuff, and this is just like a question about like, have you done this? So I was thinking that like, well, here's a possible thing that you could have done. I don't know if you did it, which is like, while you were giving the talk, you were saying like maybe they're a vegan for health reasons, not for like environmental reasons, but we have these kind of vibey associations between being vegan and caring about the environment, and so that there's some middling thing going on there. What about the scenario where you explain to somebody, like how sticky are those vibes? You explain to somebody this person is vegan, and they're vegan for this specific reason, namely they need to do it for their health, or they think it's better for their health or something, and then you present the person as buying an SUV. Like, does that stick around even in that case, or is the explanation sort of get rid of it? I don't know. I'm interested.
So first, kudos for the zeitgeist and the vibiness of the questions, because I'm hearing vibes everywhere now, and it just feels so vibey to hear it and talk about it. It's a great suggestion. We have done that actually, and so we've done this a couple ways. We sort of primed people, so we didn't say the person who said the attitude, but we primed people with different kinds of attitudes by having them read about concepts and say like, oh, vegetarianism is like this, or being health conscious, right, is about this, or an environmentalist, or read a separate scenario about a person who's an environmentalist before giving the vignettes. And then we kind of varied the design so that we included specific behaviors that were consistent with each prime, as well as general ones that were consistent with one prime but not the other, or with this prime and not the other, in which case in the other condition it becomes sort of unrelated, to see how it happens. And so far as we can tell, the data are sort of still being analyzed, right? But it seems to be working in that it moves people away. The one thing that I would love to be able to do in this research, that some of the stuff we're trying to get at with the reaction time studies, is to see how much we're getting like facilitation versus interference. And so trying to figure out, like, are things being facilitated, like making people faster to respond, versus something where it's not facilitated? Or is it like interfering when someone gets the opposite one? It kind of keeps them from making that association. So we're trying to tease all that apart. I'm not sure how much we'll get to in this first paper, kind of where we're just trying to establish the effect and show that it exists and show some evidence for either facilitation or interference. But I think future work is definitely going to try to tease out exactly what's going on there. So thanks for the question. Yeah, thank you.